Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. If you'll just bear with me, I have a little bit of an introduction. It's very special, so I would like to read a few things. Hello, hola, amigos. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to be with us today, September 17th, 2018. My name is Dr. Christina Rawls, and I am a philosophy professor at Roger Williams University. If you'll allow me a moment, I'd like to give our guest speaker, George Yancy, a proper introduction. I would like to first thank the Department of Modern Languages, Philosophy, and Classics here at RWU, especially Bob Blackburn, Mike Wright, my two philosophy colleagues, Peter Thompson, Anthony Hollingsworth, Cindy Chappelle, and our new dean, Cynthia Scheinberg. Thank you for being here. I also saw our interim provost, Bob Cole, is in the house. I would also like to thank our Chief Diversity Officer, Ame Lambert, and Bob Cole for their continued support, financial and otherwise, in ensuring this event would take place. Lastly, I'd like to thank the Department of Philosophy at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, because this event is a twofold event today, and after Dr. Yancy's talk here at RWU, we'll be headed up north to UMass Lowell for another talk this evening. Finally, a quick shout out as well to Emory University, as they provided resources for some of Dr. Yancy's travel costs as well. So it's been a joint effort across many universities. Dr. George Yancy is professor of philosophy at Emory University. He received his BA in philosophy from the University of Pittsburgh with honors. His first MA in philosophy is from Yale University, and he obtained his second MA from New York University in Africana Studies, where he received the distinguished Henry M. McCracken Fellowship. He received his PhD from Duquesne University with distinction and was the first graduate student to receive the McNulty Fellowship in the Department of Philosophy. He is the author, editor, and co-editor of over 20 books. 3 of his books were named Choice Outstanding Academic Books. His books, Black Bodies, White Gazes, received an honorable mention from the Gustavus Myers Center for the Study of Bigotry and Human Rights. His co-edited book, Our Black Sons Matter, was listed by Booklist as a top 10 diverse nonfiction book. He is known for his influential essays and interviews at the New York Times philosophy column, The Stone. He has twice won the American Philosophical Association's Committee on Public Philosophy's op-ed contest. Dr. Yancy's 3 most recent books are the second and expanded edition of Black Bodies, White Gazes, Rowman and Littlefield, On Race, 34 Conversations in a Time of Crisis, Oxford University Press, and his new authored book, Backlash, What Happens When We Talk Honestly About Racism in America. We have extra copies of Backlash at our bookstore for purchase after this talk, if you're interested as well. Regarding Backlash, renowned public intellectual Noam Chomsky writes, George Yancy's courageous appeal to white America, quote, to confront the problem of whiteness, to cultivate a critical awareness of the specter of whiteness and white privilege that each one of you inherits, elicited a remarkable range of responses, some hideous beyond words, some welcoming what he rightly called a gift. This eloquent meditation on the events and their meaning calls on us with piercing honesty to think hard and work hard, to excise the malignancy of white supremacy from our culture and our lives. Dr. Yancy is currently working on 2 edited books, one on Buddhism and whiteness, and another one on pedagogy under Trump, and a new authored book tentatively titled The Suturing and Unsuturing of Whiteness. If you would just give me another minute. There are many other works Dr. Yancy has edited and written as well, including works that I think are important to mention, let alone read and put on your syllabus and in your curriculum. Pursuing Trayvon Martin, Look, a White, Philosophical Essays on Whiteness, Christology, and Whiteness, What Would Jesus Do? White Self-Criticality Beyond Anti-Racism, Exploring Race in Predominantly White Classrooms, Reframing the Practice of Philosophy, African American Philosophers, 17 Conversations, The Center Must Not Hold, White Women Philosophers on the Whiteness of Philosophy. Let me finally take a special last moment to share with you all that it is my distinct, if you give me a minute, humbling honor to stand here with my friend George today. George and I met around 2005 in Pittsburgh at Duquesne University when he was in the process of defending for his doctorate in philosophy, and I was sneaking in the back door to audit PhD level classes and was not yet a doctoral student. But by 2006, I officially became a doctoral student at Duquesne to work on the philosophy of Spinoza. By 2007, I had become Dr. Yancy's first graduate teaching assistant and knew I would study and needed to study the critical philosophy of race and whiteness studies for the rest of my life. I did not defend for my own doctorate until 2015. We've been through a lot together, and I had and have a lot left to learn. George, I understand that I barely deserve to stand here today alongside you, but you are one of my greatest mentors, teachers, and now I get to call you my colleague. I would not have become a philosopher without your unwavering support and repeatedly insightful lessons over these many years. It hasn't been easy in the least. As you and I both know, I've been called almost every name in the book, but you were always there for me, and I hope I can continue to be there for you as well. As a white woman who also struggled as an outsider or marginalized, but especially in grad school, when studying the critical philosophy of race was barely acceptable in our own philosophy program, you stood by my side and I yours. Now I know this takes many forms, some underground, and I am not innocent. I have a lot of work to do, and this isn't about me. Your generosity and wisdom are boundless. Thank you for being the genuine, brilliant, caring, creative, open, courageous, and bold philosopher you are. With love in my heart, just thank you. We think, therefore we are, and we are listening, fearlessly listening. So if you'll join me in giving a Socratic and cool herc welcome, Dr. George Yancy.
Well, can you all hear me?
Yes.
It's going to go right out into the library. Wow. Okay, thanks for that wonderful introduction. But the emotions are supposed to come later, not now. Not at the beginning. But yeah, you guys should be happy to have Dr. Rawls here at your university. She has a lot to offer, and I really appreciate that very nice introduction. Let's see, what do I have here? Oh, and thank all of you all for coming. It's going to be a very different kind of talk, I think. Typically is. I think I've got it down to about 50 minutes or 45, something like that. But there'll be plenty of time for Q&A. So, and also, as a philosopher, or all of us who have our areas, we have our own lexicon, our own discourse. So if there are words that I use, and I'm going to use quite a few, jot them down and hold my feet to the fire after I give the talk, right? Don't let somebody from the outside come in and just bullshit you guys. So, hold my feet to the fire. Okay, so this is called Gift Giving and the Violence of White Backlash. I decided to situate my talk. Is this good? Did we hear any sound? Okay. I can't stand like that. I decided to situate my talk within the context of my letter, Dear White America, that was published in the New York Times philosophy column, The Stone, in 2015. But let me issue a warning. Some of the language within the talk will not be pleasant. In fact, it will be raw and uneasy. But please note that much of the language that I use this evening, or this afternoon actually, is not mine, but comes from those white readers then and those white readers now who continue to write to me, to haunt me, to attempt to stop me, to attempt to silence me, to stop my resistance. And as counterintuitive as it may seem, this talk may not leave you with much hope, especially when it comes to white people. And it's the kind of hope that I'm suggesting that itself can function to support a certain kind of hegemony and various racial habits and racist modes of being. It is amazing to me how many white philosophers, white scholars, white academics, and white intellectuals see themselves as enlightened. By the way, usually I walk around, but I'm told that I have to kind of stand here because you guys can't get in the film somehow without your permission. So I feel a little awkward standing here, but here I am. So it's amazing to me how so many white philosophers, white scholars, white academics, and white intellectuals see themselves as enlightened, perhaps even radical. And yet they continue to be dependent upon structures of white power They walk through the world with white privilege, white innocence, white immunity from white racialized forms of social, political, existential, social, and ontological dis-ease. Those who have never had the talk with their white children because they are in fact white. As black, I too have come to wonder just how resistant, how enlightened and radical I am. You see, here's the problem. Our consumptive society is able to accommodate us. Show me your radical university college scholars, and I will show you a person who has been accommodated. If we are to practice radicality in an age of moral crisis, which I think we're living in, then we don't want the system to consume us or to eat us. We want the system to choke. So that's the question. How do we make the system choke? And it is a form of resistance, and it is that form of resistance that I'm looking for. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel writes, quote, "The prophet's word is a scream in the night," end quote. I have not heard that scream in the night from many of us, and especially from white people. I argue that parrhesia, P-A-R-R-H-E-S-I-A, parrhesia, or fearless or courageous speech, is so important when discussing issues regarding race and especially whiteness. Michel Foucault says, quote, "Parrhesia then is linked to courage in the face of danger. It demands the courage to speak the truth in spite of some danger," end quote. But along with courageous speech, we need courageous listening, which I see as an openness to have one's assumptions shattered, one's self fissured, to have one's sense of ethical, epistemological, phenomenological, embodied, and affective certainty called into question, to have one's self touched to the point of vertigo and perhaps even crisis. Part of courageous speech in philosophy is to be a troublemaker, a contemporary gadfly. Being a troublemaker involves risk. As for academics, by troublemaker, I don't mean being clever or showing us how good you are at refuting the arguments of your colleagues. So much more is at stake. Critical cultural theorist Bell Hooks says that she came to theory because she was hurting. How many of you here in this room, in this space, have come here because you are hurting? So I have this little small task that I ask audiences to do, and I'm going to do it here. I want you to look at each other. Really, don't look at me. Look at each other. Just look at the person next to you, even way in the back. You guys just turn around and look at that person next to you. Just keep looking, looking, looking. Now, as you're looking, I just want you to consider this. Keep in mind that in 100 years from now, we can be pretty sure that none of us in this room will be alive. We will be dead, stinking, rotting corpses. All of us. I just want you to drink that in. So it seems to me that what we do between birth and the grave is so incredibly vital, because at some point, as philosopher Cornel West is fond of saying, quote, "We will become the culinary delight of terrestrial worms," end quote. This small exercise is not about nihilism, is not to play jokingly with our human condition, but it's about creating in us a sense of shared embodied vulnerability and thereby a shared sense of embodied commonality. The point here is that we ought to tarry with our finitude because this life, or even this moment right here, right now, is perhaps all that we have. I just added this little bit last night. Now I want you to look very quickly again at the face of the person next to you. Go ahead, really quick, look at the face. And really feel the weight of the fact that the two of you will someday, perhaps sooner than later, die. And that you will never, perhaps never ever, see each other again in the entire future of the history of this cosmos. Again, drink that in. As suggested, I fear that I will not leave you with much hope after this talk. We need something. Right, I didn't see that until now, I just heard it just then. We need something far more dangerous, something far more disconcerting, unnerving, alarming, traumatic. It seems to me that what I'm suggesting here is compatible with parrhesia. When it comes to discussing race within contexts like this one, we mustn't be like Odysseus, who dared to be adventurous and yet remain safe. We must allow the sirens to sing to us without the safety of a mast, without plugging up our ears with wax. When it comes to intimate and courageous discussions regarding race, how it is lived and how it is experienced and how it is avoided, we ought to allow for the strength of what I'd call the aleatoric, the unpredictable spaces of openness to fracture calcified norms and unproductive sedimented practices, and embodied orientations. We must be daring, which means we must be vulnerable, which means that we must be open to be wounded. We must be open to rethink how we are already touching. Now, this is a fancy language here. It's what I'll be writing about, why I'm writing about currently, what I call now the ontology of no edges, or what's called an ethics of no edges. More specifically, when it comes to intimate and courageous discussions regarding race, we must ask more specifically from white people. White people must be open to die. There is a necessary death. But I don't want you guys leaving here saying that Dr. Yancy said that white people should die. I am not talking about physical death. Everybody mark that down. But a death to your white stubbornness, a death to your white denials, a death to your white innocence, a death to your epistemological ignorance, a death to your white arrogance, a death to your white narcissism, a death to your white goodness, a death to your white fears, a death to your white color evasion, a death to your white privilege, a death to your white denials, a death to your white self-righteousness, a death to your white illusions of safety and innocence, a death to your heroic whiteness, a death to your claims of non-complicity, a death to all of those white tricks that you play to convince yourselves that you are fine, that you are the good ones, the sophisticated one, the uncomplicated white allies. I know about risk and the failure of white others to listen courageously, to undergo that required death, that required embodied what I call unsuturing. For example, I published a piece on Trayvon Martin in the New York Times in a section called The Stone. The article generated over 600 comments. One white person wrote to me the following, quote, "Your stock in trade is white guilt. Your vision of justice is payback. Whitey is the cause of all your problems. You peddle your racial hatred. That makes you a racist, the very evil you accuse me of. I read your screed on a summer's eve. You write like one. There is a place in hell for those that lead others astray. Say hi to Teddy Kennedy and Hitler when you get there," end quote. And that's actually a nice one. Some of you may also know that I wrote in 2015 a very controversial letter called Dear White America, which generated over 2,000 comments at The Stone, the New York Times. It is this letter that shapes the structure primarily of this talk. For that piece, I received tons of hate mail, really vitriolic white supremacist responses in my university inbox, voicemail, even snail mail. And I even received postcards. So in some cases, white people would actually write letters, take them to the post office, put a stamp on the envelope, just to call me a nigger in writing. As some of you might also know, police presence was necessary during some of my public talks. So generally, I'd have police here. I was told that the FBI got involved. White supremacist websites discussed the letter. And I was invited to appear on Fox News and other social media outlets, all of which I decided to decline. So here are a few of those vile responses that I received from white readers. As you listen to them, I want you to grasp the sense of the existentially and affectively dangerous work that is at stake when it comes to critically engaging the theme of race and whiteness in North America. And as you listen, keep in mind that I refer to that letter as a gift of love. And yet, I received so much white, violent backlash in return. Now, while I'm not sure about the issue of trigger warnings, right, I'm not sure I believe in those, I'm assuming that we're all adults here, and that in some sense we're all concerned with the truth. So I'm going to read to you some unadulterated truth. Voice messages. Quote, "Dear nigger professor, you are a fucking racist. You're a piece of shit destroying the youth of this country. You're neither African nor American. You're a pure 100% nigger. You would never marry outside of your nigger race. That's a fact. You're a fucking smug nigger. You are uneducated with education. You are a fucking animal, just like all black people in the United States of America, including that nigger Kenyan that was born in fucking Kenya that has usurped the White House. Yes, It is called the White House for a reason, because white people made this country great, you fucking nigger. End quote. Quote, hey, Georgie boy, you're the fucking racist asshole. You wouldn't have a job if it wasn't for affirmative action. Somebody needs to put a boot up your ass and knock your fucking head off your shoulders, you stupid fucking goddamn racist son of a bitch. You fucking race-baiting sons of bitches, man, you're just asking to get your fucking asses kicked. You need your fucking asses kicked. You stupid motherfucker, quit fucking race-baiting asshole, end quote. Inbox messages. Quote, Professor Yancy, all of your studies have forced me to examine my self-image and my white racist mind. You clearly state that no matter what I think, I'm a racist. Okay, cool. Thank you for clearing that up. Now I'm forced to say, because you tell me I can say nothing else, fuck you, nigger. As always, the white guy, end quote. Quote, kill yourself. Do it immediately, end quote. White supremacist websites, and I ask for the women in the audience to forgive me for this one, but here we go. Quote, cunts like this aren't philosophers. They just hate white people, simple. He should fuck off to Africa if he doesn't like living in a white country, end quote. Quote, this ugly fucking nigger, whenever I read that one publicly, I just have to say, ugly? Are you really kidding me? I mean, check out my website. That just gives me a little reprieve, guys, when I can say that. Quote, this ugly fucking nigger is just asking for access to more white females. So in other words, I wrote Dear White America, a letter that critiques whiteness in order to date white women. We have to ask ourselves, what kind of psyche creates that? Right? And I'll continue. Quote, in a sane world, this ugly nigger would be just beheaded ISIS style. Make America white again, end quote. And actually, one guy wrote to me, and again, this is Parisia. He said, Dr. Yancy, I know why you wrote Dear White America. You wrote it so that white women, and I quote him, could suck your dick. That's what he said. Quote, you should go fuck yourself, okay? Just go fuck yourself. And listen to the language of this, by the way. You're a racist fucking prick here. You are exactly the problem. So why don't you and Al Sharpton and Jesse Jack Offson all get together and circle jerk and shoot your fucking nut on each other's racist faces? You've got the NAACP, you've got the Black Congressional Caucus, you've got BET television, you've got every fucking thing. I don't owe you a motherfucking thing, asshole. You're the fucking racist, you dick, end quote. Again, be attentive to the language. And we have to ask ourselves, whose desire is this? Quote, this nigger needs to have a meat hook lovingly. Well, you know, time to use your own imagination, end quote. Quote, you can dress a nigger up in a suit and tie and they'll still be niggers, end quote. Quote, this ignorant monkey has no audience but other ignorant monkeys, end quote. Quote, Yancy, flights leave for Africa every day. Take one and take a brother with you. We can all admit bringing you here to this country was a mistake. So let's get rid of you and correct the mistake. You're not happy. We are not happy with your behavior. So do it, end quote. Quote, there are two ways you can return to Africa, on a passenger ship or in a coffin freighter. Choose quickly, end quote. Many of you might also know that I wrote an article for the New York Times entitled, I Am a Dangerous Professor. That article was in response to the fact that my name recently appeared on what is called the Professor Watch List. I don't know if you guys know of that list, which is a conservative website created by a conservative youth group known as Turning Point USA. Of course, this is post-Trump. The job of this watch list is to monitor professors who teach so-called leftist propaganda. I've never referred to myself as a leftist. From my knowledge, I am the only Emory professor who was listed. In my article, I argue that the watch list is indicative of the madness of George Orwell's 1984. While I received hundreds of positive responses from people from around the world who thought that I was courageous for writing the article, there was one message that I received from a white male who apparently discovered Dear White America for the very first time. He wrote, quote, I read your rant regarding white people, and I'm proud to inform you that I will never feel any guilt or shame for being white or who I am. Fuck you, you race-baiting piece of shit. You're just another nigger with a chip on his shoulder that's looking for excuses to justify his hatred. And guess what, asshole? Nobody, and this is all in caps here, Nobody white gives a fuck what you think. My only regret is that I didn't hear your bullshit in person so that I could call you a fucking nigger to your face, you worthless bitch, and then kick your black ass until you are half dead. Fuck off, boy, end quote. I want you to tarry with that language, to know that this is not something out of the white temporal zone of the 1930s and the 1960s, but sent to me in 21st century white America. I had not anticipated how the onslaught of vile and racist discourse would leave a wound, would traumatize. My physiology registered the wounds, mood swings, irritability, trepidation, disgust, anger, nausea. On one white supremacist website, the white writer wrote the following: nigger, 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 right down the page. That was his response to Dear White America. But why so many times? How many times must I be reminded? Why the overkill? Right before the end of last semester, a white man called the dean's secretary at my university, stating that he is looking for, quote, that nigger Yancy, end quote, and that he is going to my office, quote, right now to knock his fucking head off his shoulders, end quote. And then he hung up the phone. Of course, this involved more police presence and escorts. So here is the toll that I continue to endure. I value my life far too much, and the value of my children's lives even more. Yet, that for me is how I experience white America. Recently, I received the following, quote, you deserve to be punished with several fists to your face. You're nothing but a troublemaker. I've had enough of your racist talk. You'd better watch what you say and to whom you say it. You may just end up in the hospital with several injuries, or maybe on a cold slab in a local morgue. You've got a big mouth that needs to be slammed shut permanently, end quote. Local morgue? Slammed shut permanently? These are the threatening words from an anonymous white person's letter to me, significantly shortened here, which was handwritten on both sides in black ink on a sheet of paper torn from a legal pad, the kind with the yellow-colored sheets. The envelope looked familiar, especially as I had already been the recipient, more like target, of others that carried letters containing white racist vitriol and insults. After receiving the letter that spoke of a cold slab and shutting my mouth permanently, I decided to share this one with my students, because it was the same day, in my graduate philosophy seminar. You see, I needed a witness. I think that I needed my students to help carry some of what I was feeling. So I read it aloud. I had not anticipated the emotional response, because I don't tear up much in public. As I read the letter, I began to feel a different kind of threat, the kind of threat that has implications for those whom I love. You see, a threat to my life will inevitably involve a threat to the lives of my children. And that is a threat that impacts me, my body, my spirit, with a different kind of existential and emotional gravitas. Completing the letter, I looked at my students as I thought about the repercussions of such a threat. My eyes watered, my body became stilted. I felt a rush of unspeakable anger run through my blood. I said to my students, this involves my loved ones. I can't take this hatred anymore. I need a few minutes outside of class. Silence pervaded the classroom space. Looking back, I wish that I had just said, to hell with it all. It is not worth it. Too many white people will never care or value my humanity. So many whites in America will never be honest about their hatred of black people and people of color. They will refuse to resist their whiteness. In fact, bless you, they have no idea how to critically engage their whiteness or understand its subtlety. So let's close this class session on that. Let's just say, to hell with it all. Well, that didn't happen. I came back into the room where everyone was still silent. My students' faces, for the most part, were turned down. I know what they had felt, black students, students of color, and white alike. They bore witness to my vulnerability, my suffering, the sting of unmitigated hatred, and they saw the impact within an otherwise safe academic space. A few moments passed, I apologized to them, and I resumed teaching. The space within that classroom was not the same. We witnessed something together. That space will never be the same. Some of you might know of Theo Shaw as one of the Jena Six. The Jena Six were 6 black teenagers in Jena, Louisiana, who were convicted in 2006 for beating Justin Baker, a white student in local Jena High School. Many believe that the complexity of the case, given the complexity of the case, that their convictions were too severe and racially motivated. Theo Shaw once wrote to me, I'm still in conversation with him, and asked a very difficult question. He wrote, quote, "Dr. Yancy, is to be black and male in America like being on death row?" End quote. You should know that Theo Shaw is now in law school, just about to take the bar, and he's doing very well. On the one hand, I didn't want to taint or potentially muddy his aspirations. On the other hand, I didn't want him to ever forget that to white America, he is a nigger. Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, in a speech that he delivered in Peking, China, at the age of 91, sums up an important message that all too familiarly speaks to black life in North America. Du Bois said, quote, "In my own country, for nearly a century, I have been nothing but a nigger," end quote. I felt the need to tell the truth. So my answer to Theo Shaw is clear, and I still hold it to be true. Why not? Given white America's history vis-a-vis the black body, why not? So yes, damn it. Being black, now I'm changing it from male, but being black in America is like being on death row. And if you have any doubts, then ask Stephon Clark, Danny Ray Thomas, Trayvon Martin, Jordan Davis, Renisha McBride, Eric Gardner, Walter Scott, Sandra Bland, Laquan McDonald, Eric Harris, Tamir Rice, John Crawford, Ayanna Stanley Jones, Michael Brown, Renika Boyd, Samuel DuBose, Freddie Gray, Philando Castile, and so many others. I call this section Thing. With the letter Dear White America, I wanted white people to become what I've already called unsutured, which is a powerful term and image that suggests a kind of cut or fissure or opening. Yet, who and what I am to white America was already established by a narrative that I knew all too well. Hell, within my own profession, Western philosophy, I am only a thing. The use of thing here is more than a tropological reference. Think of the philosopher Hegel. Hegel thought that black people did not possess Geist or spirit. Hegel says, quote, "Nothing consonant with humanity is to be found in his, the Negro's, or the black's character," end quote. For Hegel, the black is an animal person, sensuous and without subjectivity, self-consciousness, and the capacity of representation. This is why the black, or the Negro, is unable to represent, in an abstract sense, that human flesh is a body that is capable of psychological associations and not something like an object of the senses, something to be eaten, hence the charge of cannibalism. Or think of philosopher Immanuel Kant, who held that to be black from head to toe is clear proof that what a black person says is stupid. And it's a long story, but the quick version is that Immanuel Kant had heard something that was said to a Father Labat by a black guy who was a carpenter. And Kant thought it was very interesting what this guy said, but then Kant found out that the guy was black from head to toe and then said, well, clearly what he says, it must be stupid. So let's assume that Kant was in the audience and you put a curtain over me, right? And I said something that was brilliant. And Kant thought it was brilliant. And he said, I got to meet this guy. Then we raised the curtain. He would say, oh shit, black from head to toe. Clearly what he said is stupid. Right? You can see how bizarre that would be, right? Keep in mind that this is the same Immanuel Kant who wrote the famous 3 Critiques, who also believed that black people, and if you're black, he believed that you were born white. So if you're black, we were born white at birth, with the exception of a black ring around our navels and our genitalia. Now, my question is, this is the same Immanuel Kant who never left Königsberg. Where the hell did he see a black baby born white? But that's him. Oh, but keep in mind, let's add some other person on the spot. Our dear friend Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson, in his notes on Virginia, wrote that the orangutan, the male orangutan, prefers to have sex with black women than it does the female of its own species. That's Thomas Jefferson, the man of liberty and rights. Where did he learn that? God forbid, right? Black woman, female orangutan, male orangutan, go for it. In short, the black body has endured a process of both inscription and description, both terms intimately linked. Or think of the lynched black body, a problem, a thing in need of discipline. And here, think of the overkill. For example, in 1934, 23-year-old Claude Neal was accused of killing a white woman. And it is said that a confession was wrung out of him, meaning that it was forced, twisted, or strained out of him. When you look at the history of lynching in America, you often wonder whether any black person was ever guilty, quite frankly. There's a case where a black guy knocked on a woman's door, a white woman's door, and she was startled, literally, like, boo, and he got lynched. So Claude Neal, what did they do? White men first dragged him from his cell. They then castrated him. They cut off his penis, and then they stuffed his penis in his mouth. And while it was in his mouth, he was forced to say that I like it. Imagine that. Then they cut off his testicles, and they stuffed those into his mouth. And while those were in his mouth, he was forced to say that I like those too. They would cut him here, let's say, cut him right here, and then pull that down while he was alive. They tied a noose around his neck. He would lose consciousness. They would loosen it. He would become conscious all over again. They would cut off a finger, clip. They would cut off a toe, clip. Right? Eventually, he was killed. But before he was killed, hot coals were thrown all over his body. According to the report, 18 holes were in his head, abdomen, and chest. Pictures were sold of his mutilated body and other body parts kept as possessions. So American-style lynchings were sites of capitalism and sites of the homoerotic and sites of the deep hypersexual, things that we need to consider. Or think here of 21-year-old black female Mary Turner. We generally don't have stories about black women being lynched. Mary Turner was actually 8 months pregnant. What happened to her? She identified those white men who lynched her innocent husband. They then took Mary Turner, hung her up by her ankles. They threw motor oil on her body and gasoline, and they set her alight. And while she was burning, keep in mind, 8 months pregnant, a white man walks over with a butcher's knife, stabs her in the abdomen like a fucking pig, rips it open, at which point the baby falls out, hits the ground, according to the report, makes one sound, at which point the white man goes over and crushes its head beneath his boot. Just take that in. That's white America. Or think about the rape of enslaved black women's bodies that were said to be always sexually available, indeed, hypersexual essences, things, and thereby could not be raped. Because if you always want to be fucked, you can't be raped. And since black women are hypersexual, they can't be raped. Such black bodies are what I call the other of the second sex here, for those who've read Simone de Beauvoir. They were always metaphorically open, always desiring to be taken. Black women's bodies might be said to be holes without bottoms, or perhaps just bottoms with holes. Black women's bodies, in short, were problem bodies, things. And if 1934 is too remote to engender a sense of the gravity of the problem of how black people are treated as things, think of 1999 in New York when black male Amadou Diallo, a thing-like essence, always already on the brink of violence, was shot at 41 times by police officers, his body hit with 19 bullets as he grabbed for his, and I left that open for you all to answer, he grabbed and held his, what was it? His wallet. So our question is, what is it about a black male who holds a wallet or a black person such that for white police officers, that wallet phantasmatically becomes an object or threat of violence, a gun? Or think of black male Abner Louima in 1997, who was handcuffed by white police officers, so he wasn't a threat, but a white police officer walked behind him with a stick and rammed this stick up his rectum so far that it injured his stomach. And then allegedly took this stick and shoved it in Abner Louima's mouth, running around the police station saying something to the effect of, "This is how you break a man in." Or think of Susan Smith, the white woman who wanted to have sex with her white boss, but there was a problem. She had children. So she drowned her children and blamed it on a black man. Or think of Charles Stewart, right in Boston, a white man who in 1989 shot his pregnant wife in the head and shot himself in the abdomen. And guess who he blamed it on? A black man. He even identified the black man in a lineup, and the police believed him. Or what about being a black philosopher within a country and within an academic context where black intelligence is denied, where, for an example, I become an oxymoron as a black philosopher, standing before you only mimicking speech? Right? This says something about what it means to be black in philosophy, by the way, when you can read texts by philosophers who think that you are not capable of reading their texts. It's a strange relationship with philosophy. David Hume, one of my heroes. David Hume thought that if I can identify you, if you don't mind me pointing you and any other person, black person, we could not understand what it is that we read. We just mimic speech like a parrot. So what you're seeing before you is just Yancy parroting. I might say interesting things, but I don't know what it is what I'm saying. So let's take a quote out of the air. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time, and all of our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle, life's a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Shakespeare. What does it mean? The hell if I know. Or think here of philosopher Cornel West, who was stopped by a white police officer who accused him of trafficking cocaine. He told the white police officer, hey, look, I'm a professor of religion. And the officer said, quote, yeah, and I'm the flying nun. Let's go, nigger, end quote, and threw him in the car. Now, if you've seen The Flying Nun, played by Sally Field, if you guys have seen that, if you haven't, check some old reruns out, you know that it was a fantasy about a nun who could fly, right? She would adjust her habit and she would fly around. Not like fancy flying, just like kind of floating around like that, right? So on this score, the white police officer is saying to Cornel West that he, like the flying nun, is a fantasy. After all, how can a black body be a professor of religion or a philosopher? West might be said to be something fit for teratology. For those who don't know what teratology is, it's the study of monsters. So Cornel West is kind of Frankenstein's monster, a monstrous thing. This section, white students. My white students are always reminding me that they're not racists. We've made progress, they say. We're not like our parents and grandparents. We live in a post-racial America in which you can be whatever you want to be, if you only just try hard enough. We never own black people. We don't use the N-word, and we have plenty of black friends. In fact, we love rap music, and we date blacks and Asians and Latinos. So when it comes to race and racism, most, if not all, of my white students claim to know about the absence of their own racism. They are certain that they are not racist. They are, in short, at peace with who they are. Yet I would argue that they are at peace within the context of actually perpetuating white supremacy. What if, at the end of the day, they continue to be white racists despite all of their good intentions and honorable actions? So let's courageously ask this question. This is the question that will be in the air for a while, and hopefully after I'm long gone from here. What if to be white in America is to be a racist? I know some of you all have to leave. Don't worry, I know it's not personal. What if to be white in America is to be racist? As the so-called good whites, my students believe that they are already positioned beyond the muck and mire of contemporary forms of white racism, white privilege and white power, and white complicity. Indeed, there are many of my white students who give the impression that they were born from the head of a god, like Athena from the head of Zeus, fully mature and unscathed by the reality of white racism. So I offered them a challenge. I challenged the same white students to keep a journal of examples of white racism that they encountered at home, at school, or just within the context of everyday conversations. This is what Joe Fagan has done. His work as sociologist is called backstage racism. It's what white people do when they're by themselves, right? Or with other white people. Many of my white students were pretty sure that their journals would be sparse, perhaps even empty. Toward the end of the semester, all of my white students were deeply shocked. Indeed, by the end of the semester, they had to question their sense of certainty regarding the non-existence of their own white racism. Some came away deeply troubled by the awareness that white racism is front and center within their families, social groups, and within their dorms. So here I want to share with you 5 of those entries of white students who reported racist incidents that they encountered from other white students. So, first white student to white student. Quote, "The first day back from spring break, we had a new student move in. When my other floor mates came and noticed this, one ran down the hallway, possibly inebriated, screaming, 'There's a nigger on the floor, guys. Watch your stuff,' end quote." My question is, if you're black, have you ever had this feeling of being looked at as if you're a thief and a criminal while minding your own business? Second white student to white student, quote, "One guy told me his secret thoughts while he was boxing. He said that he always imagined his white girlfriend being banged by some really big black guy, and that this makes him so pissed off that he goes all out in boxing," end quote. Now notice he doesn't say, "I think about any old guy banging my girlfriend," but a big black guy. And this allows him to really get riled up and can box really well. My question is, if you're a black male, what is it about banging a white girl that puts white guys in such a state of frenzy? Dare I say it? Should I say it? Does it have something to do with the irrational fear of the big black dick? Third white student to white student said, quote, "When I was on an elevator, I realized as a black man and woman walked into the elevator with me, I was clutching my bag close to my body and moved it to the shoulder away from them. I had no reason to clutch my bag other than the fact that they were black," end quote. My question is, if you're black, have you ever had this experience where white people clutch their bags when they see you approaching? Fourth white student to white student, quote, "I went to get my nails done with one of my white friends, and while we were picking out our nail polish colors, I asked her what she thought of a dark purple. Jokingly, she said that dark of a nail polish would make my nails look like nigger nails," end quote. Fifth and last white student to white student, quote, "One white girl was talking about why she could never date a black guy. And she mentioned the black hands, right? Like these kinds of hands. She said, when they turn over their hand, that is really gross. They look like gorilla hands," end quote. My question is, why are black people still depicted as monkeys in the 21st century? I would like to suggest a very crude metaphor. So I wrote this last night at the hotel. Let's call it vomit. White people love eating their own vomit. First, they vomit on black bodies. Second, then they pretend as if they didn't do it. Third, they recoil and move away from black bodies as if black bodies naturally stink of vomit. Fourth, then white people eat their own vomit because that vomit consists of lies, stereotypes, assumptions, and myths that they, whites, have projected onto the black body. But they have to internalize those lies to make themselves feel better, feel superior, in fact, feel human. So fifth, white people are getting fat off their own vomit. And while this is a rather graphic and grotesque portrayal of the structure of whiteness, the question that we need to ask is, how do we starve white people, or how do we starve whiteness? How do we prevent white people or whiteness from vomiting on black bodies and bodies of color? So what must we do? What must whiteness do or undo? Briefly, I'll try to address what I have in mind through the deeply sad death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. How are we doing on time? Good? So this is the end here. George Zimmerman, and by the way, George Zimmerman, I've spoken to Trayvon's parents. There was recently a BET documentary on Trayvon Martin called Rest in Power, which I got to be part of, which was really cool. But they don't refer to George Zimmerman as George Zimmerman. They refer to him as the killer. George Zimmerman, or the killer, was on the prowl, his physical gait uninviting, a body in the mode of taking a stand, upright, with no intention of genuflection, etymologically to bend the knee. As such, Martin became the enemy, monster, the stranger, an infestation unworthy of life itself, a disposable life. After all, Martin was supposedly there to take, to pillage. In other words, Zimmerman, or the killer, chased Martin, pursued him, In fact, if you look up the etymology of the term pursue, it's already linked to the term to prosecute or to hold a trial. It was Zimmerman, or the killer's bodily style and comportment, being on the hunt, as it were, that positions Martin as the one who is about to commit a crime, who is to be feared and who is to be tried. Yet Martin is the site of the precarious. Now, for some of you who may have read Judith Butler, I'm taking the term precarious and I'm playing with it a bit here. Yet Martin is the site of the precarious. As such, Martin's being is in the form of an asking. And his asking was met with a bullet, fired from a gun, by a sutured self that failed to lose itself in that moment or to come to terms with its being always already dispossessed. The killer, or Zimmerman, should have recognized Martin's being as precarious. And if you look at the word precarious, it actually means to pray, which is quite profound, which denotes mutual dependency, a form of mutual asking, and entreaty, a form of prayer, of mutual supplication. So if Trayvon Martin is ontologically not a problem, but a site of asking, then what is required is a response. Think of the unfolding of the potential of something powerfully beautiful and yet terrifying had the killer, in fact would not have become the killer, become unsutured or opened up in relationship to Trayvon Martin's body, a body that is an asking. Will you help me? Will you take care of me as I walk in this unfamiliar space? Will you support me as I walk here with effortless grace? Can you see my body, my black body, as one that matters? Zimmerman, or the killer, in other words, in the words of Luce Irigaray, should have asked the question of Martin, who art thou? He should have listened to Martin's voice, be confronted by Martin's alterity, and not have, as I'm using this language, vomited on Martin. By asking the question, Zimmerman would, in essence, have placed his own self-same identity on hold, a kind of temporal abeyance. And then Zimmerman, or the killer, would have asked, quote, or would have added, quote, I am and I become thanks to that question, end quote. For it is through the interrogative, who art thou, that the killer waits to become and realizes that his being is inextricably linked to that of Martin's. When it comes to the disposability of black bodies, what we need are no illusions about the history of white supremacy, especially the kind that is uneventful, mundane, and everyday. The kind that shows itself each Sunday morning where white bodies continue to commune together and bond together, where black bodies are de facto absent through iterative white practices of exclusion. Like at Emory University, and no doubt here at Roger Williams University, where white bodies move through space and where their bodies, as Sarah Ahmed would say, trail behind their actions, where whiteness goes unmarked, right? So I generally give these talks at predominantly white institutions. And these institutions are themselves, I'm arguing, sites of violence against black bodies and bodies of color. Because how can they be predominantly white? How can they be predominantly white and racism not to reside at the very core of that institution and in the bodies of those white students who traverse every day across campus? When white students, in virtue of being white, move through normative spaces, so here at your university, there are normative white spaces. You need not ask yourself, am I wanted here? I can't imagine a student here at this university asking, am I wanted here? Or do I belong here? Within the context of how I think about the complexity of whiteness and white people engaging in the process of attempting to undo whiteness, the concept of arrival has very little purchase. I can say something about that during Q&A. When white people stress arrival vis-a-vis their anti-racism, this can function to keep them sutured from lingering with the profound and intricate layers of white supremacy. Kenosis, or emptying, in relationship to white racism, involves diligence and a constant process of return. There is no single and total canonic moment of emptying of white racist sedimentations, assumptions, images, and affects. This is why I continue to stress the importance of nurturing a disposition to be unsutured, a disposition to crack, recrack, and crack again the calcified operations of the white gaze, of white being. White people, as James Baldwin would say, must stand and confront history, do battle with forms of historical creation that have gotten us to this place, a place where whiteness and white people refuse to or fail to be undone, fail to lose themselves to an address that comes from outside of themselves, from outside of their white gazes, from black people and people of color. But how can a site like this, right? How can a place like Roger Williams University, its whiteness, how can it be addressed from outside when it's so predominantly white? That's the question that you all should be asking yourselves. Baldwin says, quote, "Love takes off masks that we fear we cannot live without and know we cannot live with," end quote. Bell Hooks says that love involves telling the truth to ourselves and sharing it with others. Black theologian James Cone, who just died recently, says, quote, "Love is a refusal to accept whiteness. To love is to make a decision against white racism," end quote. So where are those whites in America, North America? Where are those whites here, right, at Roger Williams University, who are refusing to accept whiteness in the name of love? Dr. Martin Luther King says that racism, quote, "is like a boil that can never be cured as long as it is covered over, but must be opened with all of its pus-flowing ugliness," end quote. If black lives really matter to white people, I desire to see white people explode, to see their white rage turned against their white power and their complicity with white supremacy. I would like to see their white rage overflow in the streets of this nation, shouting that black lives matter, or better yet, shouting, white lives have mattered exclusively for far too long. I desire to see white people in massive droves lay down the armory of white privilege and tear apart, be in crisis. So what does crisis look like at your university? What does white crisis look like? Has it emerged? Have you seen it? Have you seen it displayed? Crisis, as I'm using the term here, is a species of what we might call metanoia, a kind of perceptual and psychic breakdown. It isn't about an immediate repair, but involves tarrying, lingering within that space of breakdown. I want to see an America where white lives cease to matter because they are white. But let's end on that indispensable question, though one that I would say is asked with love, the kind of love that Baldwin talks about. Let's ask it again. What if to be white in America is to be racist? And if this is the case, what is to be done? How do white people address this without masks, without white backlash? Thank you. So I'm going to field my own questions here. Hope you guys came with some questions. A lot of language thrown out there. A lot of troubling stuff. Keep in mind about that death thing. I take it quite seriously, right? We may not have another moment, right? And I know you guys have some beliefs about what happens in the afterlife, but we don't know that for sure. So as far as it goes, this could be it. So ask for some clarification. Go ahead, you're on.
Thank you. Sure. When you first started writing these topics that are seen as controversial, how did you feel with the initial hate response that you would get? Like, did it used to bother you a lot more? Did you take it like more personally?
Yeah, sure. Good question. So I didn't, put it this way, my wife told me not to read them, but I had to. Look what I've got, right? I had to read them. But I guess what I didn't, look, when I wrote Dear White America, I assumed that there would be some folk out there who wouldn't like what I said. But I didn't expect to be called a hood rat, a silverback, a pavement ape, that I wanted white women to suck my dick, that to put a meat hook in my body. There were some other white people even said, Martin Luther King is like rolling over in his grave because of your letter, Dear White America. And I had to remind him that Dr. Martin Luther King said, quote, the vast majority of white people are racist, either consciously or unconsciously. That's Martin Luther King, right? It's not just the king who says turn the other cheek, right? So I didn't anticipate the rawness. I didn't anticipate the pathology. I didn't anticipate the vomit. I'm using that word vomit very specifically, right? It's the idea that what you're calling me, the guy who said, sit around and, forgive this, I'm just repeating the language, but to sit around and circle jerk and shoot your nut on it. I mean, you have to ask yourself, where does that come from? Whose imagination and whose desire? It's not mine, so I consider that to be vomit being spewed out of his unconscious onto me, right? But then you see, he needs to eat it again. He needs to eat the vomit, to eat the lies in order to sustain his own identity. So the more interesting argument that I'm making here is really I'm posing the question is, what is whiteness? I mean, David Rodinger at one point writes, he wrote one of the progenitors of critical whiteness studies, he wrote that whiteness is not just false and not just oppressive. He says it's nothing but false and oppressive. So the question I ask you all here, since this is a predominantly white institution, unless I'm wrong, unless my eyes have deceived me, you guys need to be asking yourselves the question, what is whiteness? And you have to ask yourselves, is whiteness ever innocent? Now, Dear White America made the claim that there is no white innocence. And if there's no white innocence, that means that your university can't be innocent. Just let that sink in. Be pissed off with me a little bit for saying that. Which means then, if I were here as a black student, I would feel uncomfortable. Because when I'm at APA associations, American Philosophical Associations, that are predominantly white and male, I'm looking around for somebody who looks like me. I don't see them. I feel alienated. And my white grad students will often ask me, why, Dr. Yancy? Why do you feel alienated? Hello? It's a white space. Typically, historically, when we see so many white people, it was a lynching. Right? So I'm talking about the feeling of being at home. So if you're at your university, right, you must feel at home if you're white. And so I'm asking white people in predominantly white spaces to not feel at home. And then what does that look like, though? Who goes out on campus and goes, where am I? Why am I here? Why are there so many white people here? How did that happen? Oh, I see, it was by accident. Really? Yeah, well, we can all go to Harvard or Yale, or we can come here. Roger. Well, we going here. Right? It can't be the case, right? And so what does it mean then to be in crisis? What does it mean to go out on your campus and walk down the hallways or wherever you are and just fall out on the ground and lose your way? Really, if we had more time, whiteness is a structure that provides you with an orientation, a way, right? And this is why, for an example, if I pick up Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, I have to realize that that book that I'm picking up, notice let's say this is the Critique of Pure Reason. I pick it up, I open it up, and I'm starting to read it. But the Immanuel Kant that I'm reading said that I'm black from head to toe, which means it's clear proof that what I say is stupid. So he didn't write that book for me. Most of the works written in Western philosophy were not meant for me. And even for white women. I think Kant pretty much held that you guys get headaches or something, right, when you read too much. So, back to your question, I didn't anticipate the level of vitriol, right? And I think it had something to do with right around this time. So even when I was looking at white supremacist websites, they had these like a little emoji images of Trump that were kind of smiling at me, which is kind of interesting. Perhaps I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. I don't think many of us saw this coming. But here's the problem. A Latina student asked me recently, she says, Dr. Yancy, why do you continue to talk about whiteness? Why do you continue to talk to white people? When at the end of the day, most of them don't give a damn what you say anyway. The answer to that question, so that I can remain sane, is I do it for the love of my sons. And I do it for the love of those white children who can still be saved. Now, I'm not using that term in a particularly religious sense, right? Who still might be liberated, right? And it's a funny place to be because it's what I call gift giving, right? It's giving a gift, but the hard part is one black woman called me out one day. She said, Yancy, I hear what you're saying, but you're asking me to gift give to people who at the end of the day consider me to be a nigger bitch? Excuse that language? How can I give to them? That means you're asking me to be their saviors and at the same time to be their objects. That is not a fair place to be. It's like us as men asking women, teach us what it means not to be sexist. We'll continue to sexually objectify you and cut away at your body, but teach us. Unfair. We don't need saving in that sense, right? But yet the gift is necessary. So at the end, I argue that what white people need is a form of white double consciousness. And what that means is that whites must be able to see themselves through our eyes, the eyes of black people and people of color. Because my argument, if we had more time, is that you can't see the limits of your own racism because it's a site of opacity. And you can't step outside of racism. Look, if getting outside of racism is like, let's say this was racism and I went like this. Watch me. There it is. Racism, me. Ain't happening, right? There's no place to jump where you're not jumping back into white supremacy, right? So I was shocked, put it that way. Shocked about what I knew to be the case about white America, but I got to experience. So there's something bizarre about writing a letter that you call a letter of love, and then to have all of those threats come back to you, threatening your bodily integrity, death threats, right? Being called, again, the term nigger is just my middle name now, right? I've heard it so many times. But one pushes forward, one pushes on, right? But here's the hope point. Do I leave you with hope? I hope not. And why do I say that? Because that sounds so counterintuitive. Because hope can also sustain ways of not looking at white supremacy. Sarah Ahmed, if you know of her, has written about this. Because often when you get at the end of these talks, someone will inevitably raise their hand in the back and they'll say, oh, and you kind of go, okay, yeah, go ahead. And I say, how do we fix this? And then I don't think I want to answer that question. Because asking how do you fix it psychologically suggests that there's a distantiation between you and now the problem. How do we fix it? What? It. The problem. You mean how do we fix you? Right? I don't have the answer for that. Right? We can talk about it. So that's what I mean by hope. Right? Because white people can use hope. It's like Dr. Yancy came today to our university, and boy, did he give it to us. It's like, yes! I feel so beaten. But now I'm free. Bullshit. Right? The journey can only begin now. Look, at the end of the day, all that I can be is an anti-sexist sexist. Are there any sexists in the room? Just raise your hand if you're any sexists. Come on, homeboys. Oh, okay, so some of the boys didn't raise their hands. I guess you guys, when you're walking down the street, right, and that woman walks by, you never go like this. Right? You never look at pornography. You never have thoughts about having sex with women. You never do. Okay, you guys are good. For those who didn't raise their hands, you guys need to teach me because I'm a sexist, right? Probably started when I was looking at Sears magazines at some point. But the best that I can be is an anti-sexist sexist, so I argue that the best that white people can be are anti-racists racists. You can do something, there can be anti-racist praxis, but at the end of the day, there is no place called a rival. Now, for those, I know you're right, but for those who are feeling uncomfortable, because I can see facial expressions from here, if you guys are feeling uncomfortable, don't let me leave this This is your space that I'm invading. But I get to go home, right? I'm splitting, guys. And for the few students of color and faculty of color, assuming that they're here, you guys got to deal with this, not me. So I say, let's talk about it right now. before I leave. Right? You're on.
Is this on? Okay.
Yep.
That's fine. I was just going to ask if you think, I know I don't want to ask how do we fix this problem? But,
Okay, fair enough.
Jackie, can you put the mic closer?
Sorry. I'm not trying to ask the how do we fix this issue question,
Yeah.
but in response to when you brought the assignment to your students of keeping a journal, would you say that's possibly kind of I don't want to say a necessary first step, but kind of a good starting place that anyone could really do to start unsuturing?
Absolutely. Excellent. Absolutely. And Joe, I owe this work to Joe Fagan. I think philosophers need to be more in conversation with the social sciences, and they didn't need to be in conversation with us. So yes, it's called backstage racism. So he got his students to keep a journal. I did this. It was really fruitful, really fructifying, to use that word, because they got one to see things. It was almost as if asking them to write the journal, to keep the journal, made them more cognizant of stuff that they had not seen. So the very process of, I need to keep this journal, made them attentive, right? But you see, you have to also ask, now it gets more complicated, because when they're writing the notes, you kind of have to, when they're right there listening to that one student say, these will look like nigger nails, you kind of ask, now you have to wonder about, as a white person observing that, what do you do? Typically, they wouldn't do anything. There would be no intervention. But this is what white people do all the time. It's a form of white bonding. We see things, we hear things, we're silent, which makes us complicit. Right? So my argument is a complicity claim. If you're interested in this, look at Barbara Applebaum's work. My argument is that, or as Rabbi Abraham Heschel says, few are guilty, but all are responsible. So my argument is that if you're white, you're already touching my body. Now, I can explain that more, but it has to do with what I'm calling an ontology of no edges. There are no edges between us. So even if you're walking across campus and you get to walk across, unlike what I do at Emory, for example, when I walk across campus, I rarely take out my cell phone because of being afraid that my cell phone might be mistaken as a gun. But let's assume that you don't do that. So the question becomes, when you're not doing, if that's not your worry, that means that you are comfortable in your skin. But if you're comfortable in your skin, that means you're part of an institutional historical structure that gives that comfort to you. And that sight becomes an affordance for you, but not for me. So that means your safety is precisely purchased at my expense. Now, I know that sounds complicated, but I'm suggesting that we rethink a radical notion of responsibility and connectedness, a radical ontology that says we're not separate neoliberal subjects. You guys are touching me before I got here, if you happen to be white. This is my argument, right? So I think, yes, at a place like this, you guys need to keep that journal as an initial, let's say, movement toward it, right? And then what you have to do, because this is what we want to do, you don't want to ask black folk to come in and teach you about your whiteness, but, and here's the but, you have to have their voices critically involved, but what we want you to do is the lion's share of the work. So that means amongst you has to come out of that cadre, out of that group, whites who are prepared to tell the truth about their identities, prepared to love. And Baldwin says this. Baldwin says, in love, we must teach our younger brothers and sisters to face themselves and to face who they are. So he doesn't mean Hollywood love. He doesn't mean some bullshit romantic nonsense, right? He says love is removing the masks that we fear we cannot live with or without, and that we know we cannot live with. So removing the mask is comparable, and I'm glad you threw my language out there, to unsuturing. And by unsuturing, if that word sounds familiar, as when, for example, someone is cut, because if you cut yourself, you're kind of unsutured, you're open, but then what you do is you run to the doctor to get sutured, right? To get sutured up. Or when you're in crisis, and that's why I use that term. If you're doing psychology and a client is in crisis, you want to get them in a state where they're not in crisis, so you give them medication. I'm saying of white people, to hell with the medication, stay in crisis. Let me see you walling around on the ground. Or let me see what it means to be unhinged as a white person, in virtue of your whiteness. Not unhinged as in Charlottesville, right? And I don't mean I'm talking about, look, what I'm after is when Anderson Cooper has black pundits on his show, and they all talk about Charlottesville, and they all agree that what happened in Charlottesville is a problem, right? Obviously. I call that spectacular forms of racism. But then there are the non-spectacular forms of racism, but racism nonetheless. I want Anderson Cooper to say, when he does this, this will be powerful. When he says, you know what? We're all talking. I got black pundits on here. We're talking about what's going on in Charlottesville. We all agree that they're racist. But guess what? I, too, am a racist. Now, when that happens, that will be extraordinary. But for the most part, whites distinguish themselves as good whites and the bad whites. That creates a false dichotomy, which allows white people to continue to perpetuate white supremacy. Look, I know that I'm not Bill Cosby. I'm not Harvey Weinstein, right? I'm not, what's the guy's name? Kavanaugh, right? These allegations that have been put forward recently. I'm not that. And so does that make me great? Hell no. Does that let me off the proverbial hook? No. Are my hands dirty? Yes. Do I occasionally, given my habits? Look, we're living in a country that is predicated on millions of dollars spent on pornography. How can you as a male, cis male, gendered, whatever you want to identify yourself, not be subjected to that kind of imagery, that kind of pornogrification? You can't. But you can do something about it. So for me, philosophy, I hope I'm not getting too far away, but for me now, philosophy is less about wonder, and for me, philosophy has come to be a space of suffering. That's how I understand philosophy now. I suffer at 3 levels. One, I suffer because I don't know why I'm here. If you guys can explain that to me, please give me the answer. Because as a teenager, I used to shout out into space to some being that I thought was there, and I never got an answer. And apparently that being, if that being exists, is very silent. So I don't know why we're here. I don't know why the universe is expanding. It may one day contract. At one point, I didn't think we died. When I was young, I told my mom, I said, why did you have me? She was like really thrown off by it. I said, when I found, because I didn't know when I was like 8 that I died. I really didn't. I thought we lived forever. I was thinking, I didn't sign up for this shit. You can't bring me into this world and have me like loving my mother and sister and now tell me I got to go? Whose idea was that, right? So I said to my mom once, I said, you know what? I'm upset that you had me, that you gave birth to me, because now I have to leave. Now, of course, that just threw her off, right? But then she got more of me, too, because I was just a weird kid. Because one night I asked my mom, she raised me a Baptist, I asked my mom, could I pray for the devil? Like for 2 months. You guys ever do the, now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul? That one? And you say, God bless my mother, my sister. Well, one night I asked my mom, there I was on my knees, hands folded, and I said, Mom, can I pray for the devil? I mean, she almost like fell out, right? And it took her about 2 months, after which she said yes. And there I was saying, at the very end, I'd say, and God bless the devil. But that was me that's me as a young kid thinking, wow, you are really strange, dude. But philosophically, there I was, right? And think about it, theologically, that is a rich question, right? If God is about redemption, if that's the view you accept, and if the devil is this entity that is beyond redemption, maybe from this little 10-year-old black boy, he could get some help, right? So suffering in that way, but also suffering now in the sense of speaking truth to power, right? Like to bear witness to the suffering in the world. I mean, Heschel says this. Heschel says, you know, we've lost this capacity to feel rage, right? Think about Levinas, who talks about insomnia. Do you guys lose sleep? I mean, like the kids recently killed that were on that bus in Yemen. It's hard for me to sleep, right? That Saudi raid, right, backed by U.S. military. What does that mean to us, right? And look how wonderful we are. Look, I mean, we're in the library here at your university. I'm here talking, you know, at Emory. By the way, I make serious money at Emory University, right? They pay me, I mean, it's like unbelievable. Right? But notice this. There are people suffering in our world. dying daily. This is going to be really crude what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it. When I was at Duquesne, I used to leave the university and I used to drive up Forbes Avenue. And while I drove up Forbes Avenue, there was always a prostitute, a different prostitute on the street. And I remember always driving by there not saying a fucking word to her. She would look at me, and I may have at that time even blushed. But I didn't say a word to her. But what does that mean? Right? I know what could have happened, and I'm going to be very crude and very open. I could get her to suck my dick for $10, maybe $7, maybe even $3, because she was also on crack cocaine. As a man, I could have done that. But again, I drove by and didn't say a word. Who drives by and does that? Well, we all do. We know where prostitutes hang out. This is not a commentary, by the way, about all prostitution. The point I'm trying to make here is that while we're in class, while we're so privileged, while we're so wonderful, right? While I'm making a wonderful salary, some woman somewhere right now, strung out on crack cocaine, is sucking somebody's dick for $3. Somebody's dying. Somebody's being raped. Some children are being killed. Some children are being trafficked sexually. Somebody's being abused. So it's almost as if, why the hell are we here right now? Given the existential gravity of life and the impact and the ways in which people are suffering, why are we here? Am I not wasting our time? My time? So that's what I also mean now, that philosophy for me is a site of suffering. Because I don't know how to shake it. Now, by the way, this doesn't mean that I don't have fun. Right? I like vanilla ice cream, and I have it on Friday nights. And my sons have got me watching all the Marvel films, right? But, even as I'm watching Thor do his thing, in my head, there's that suffering. I can't seem to turn it off, right? And so, speaking back about whiteness and your question, the question is, what do you do here as white students? How do you speak to administration? How do you get more faculty of color? How do you begin that process? How do you lose sleep over the fact that this university is predominantly white? And when will it stop? When will it be more integrated? And integration is a funny word, by the way, because really you don't want to integrate. You want to critique whiteness. Because it's easy to say, bring them on in, without changing the structure, right? We want more women in philosophy without ever critiquing the canon that is male-dominant and white. Come on. Because then it becomes secondary. Feminist philosophy. I've been in faculty meetings where I have not defended women, where I know not at Emory, by the way, let's get that on camera, at another university, where the faculty are like, feminism, please. That's not philosophy. That's some mere sociological nonsense, right? But I let it slide. Notice, that's sexism. That silence is indicative of sexism. Okay, another question?
I just wanted to ask this after reading the book. How do you feel?
So you read Backlash?
Yeah.
Wow, thank you.
Referring to the N-word, and I say the N-word because as a black male, I've come to realize the severity of that word and the power that it has. So I refrain from using it as much as possible, especially with the ending that you provided in the book and in this talk. At this point in your life, how does that word make you feel?
Oh, good question. Funny, I'm good friends with Cornel West, and one of his recordings, he talks about dropping the term altogether, burying the term nigger altogether, because it's got to go, no matter what its variation is, right? No matter the spelling, with an A at the end or A or A-H, right? I'm not as old as Cornel West, so I'm young enough to have my foot in the X-Clan, Poor Righteous Teachers, right? Little Snoop Dogg. But then, I'm old enough such that I don't listen to all the contemporary stuff, but I'm still trying to, because I used to write about rap and hip-hop culture. When it comes in this form, I quickly came to realize something. I actually talked to very prominent white scholars in public intellectuals who received death threats. What was interesting, and I point this out in the book, is that when white scholars receive death threats, they get death threats. But there's no term. It's not like people write to Noam Chomsky and says, I'm going to kill you, you hunky. Well, wait, but he's Jewish, right? Oh, see, they could play that way, right? But it's not in virtue of being white, but in virtue of being Jewish, right? But the white public intellectuals, they never were racialized. Or maybe they were racialized to the extent that they weren't called by any racial terms, because whiteness is a site of neutrality, right? But what was interesting is that I not only got to death threats, but I was called a nigger. So I was racialized. It was a racialized, racist violence that I underwent as well. So in here, it's hard to describe. It's hard to articulate when you didn't grow up being called a nigger, right? Well, once maybe when I was at the University of Pittsburgh, some whites were driving by in a car late at night and yelled it out. But when you get it this way every day during that period, and I still get nasty messages, it takes an incredible psychic toll on the integrity of your body and your psyche. But not only that, if you happen to have black children, too, by extension, you begin to feel yourself, you think, nigger, 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 and then you think, that means your children are also niggers. That means your mother is also a nigger. And that there are people in 2018 who think this way all the time, right? So you feel dehumanized. Because as Randall Kennedy at Harvard says that the term nigger is an epithet that generates epithets, right? So for an example, if you're Irish, you are considered the niggers of Europe. If you are Arab, you're considered to be a sand nigger. If you're Palestinian, you're considered to be the niggers of the Middle East. But notice that the term nigger is used in those cases to degrade. But if you're black, I guess you must be a nigger, right? You are the original nigger, right? And this is not a nice thing to be, right? But you see, nigger is that dehumanizing term that's all the way over here for which there is no comparable term for white people. If I use the term honky, cracker, Miss Ann, go back as far as that use of that term, there ain't no term. Which means then that in Western culture, in white America, the black body represents a site of what I would call the ontologically nullified site. So if you all are familiar with Afro-pessimism, it grows out of that kind of tradition. The black body is deemed nothing. It is shit. It is disposable. It is refuse. That's what it is. So that's my problem with the use of the term nigger coming out of white people's mouths. But just as women have tried to reclaim the term bitch by taking it out of the mouths of men, I fully support young black folk, older black folk, who take that term nigger and say, what's up, my nigger? Now that's my reading, that's my term, because black people have to resist, and it's a form of resistance. It's saying, I'm going to take that most vile, vicious, hating term that you've used, snatch it out of your claws, right out of your mouth, and use it as a benefit. How more ironic, how more incredible, how more protean can a people be that while they're under oppression, they take the very tools that were used to oppress them, right, and flip the script on them and give them a different meaning, and hence re-signify them. So that's kind of my position. But nobody in this book called me, hey, what's up, my nigger? And if they did, I would think, please, There are some terms that are off for white folk. Like one Duquesne student once said to me, why don't we have a white student union? It was like, because everything else is. Why don't we have a white history month? And one white kid said, why can't we use the term nigger? He really said, and another kid backed him up. Says, yes, that's racial discrimination if we can't use it. If you read the work of Shannon Sullivan, she calls this whiteness as ontological expansionism. And even Du Bois said it. He said, whiteness is the ownership of the earth forever and ever, amen. Whiteness is a structure that is colonial in nature, and it's binary in nature. It needs the other. It eats up stuff. Right? But sorry, guys, you can't have everything. Some stuff is just our stuff. And don't feel like it's a zero-sum situation. I assure you, by not being able to say, "What's up, my nigga?" you'll be okay. Right? You're okay. You can't say that. You can say some other stuff. You guys make up your own term. "What's up, hunka?" I don't know. I don't know how you would change that. "What's up, cracker?" I don't know. I don't even know how you do that, but in answer to your question, I too detest the term. But I'm probably a little more liberal in terms of the way you think about it, and that's okay. That's okay. But I would respect you, so I would never say to you, "What's up, my nigga?" Okay, we still have time. Yeah.
Thank you. This is just a really, really short comment.
Sure.
There is a website called theroot.com, which is black journalism.
Yep.
And it has been more informative for me than a whole lot of other things.
Excellent.
And not just the writing, but the comments.
Good, excellent. And I would just sanction. I don't need to sanction that for you, but I need to just second that. I think you're right. I think it begins with reading stuff like theroot.com, reading Toni Morrison, reading Ralph Ellison, reading Baldwin, Ellison, you name it, right? It's about exposing yourself to literature that challenges who you are. Because the most fascinating thing that will happen to you, in fact, I got a set of instructions for you. If you're white, go back to your dorms at some point this evening or late tonight, by yourself, by the way. Get naked, again, by yourself. Look in the mirror naked, completely naked, and just say to yourself while you're looking in the mirror, what's so, and use this word too, what's so fucking special about being white? Just look at that lack of melanin and ask, what's so important about that? And at the end of the day, there ain't nothing special about whiteness. It's just a historical creation. Now, am I saying that there's something more important about blackness? No, that would be inconsistent. But the problem is, we didn't colonize you guys. African countries didn't go to Europe and enslave Europeans and brought them across the Middle Passage and then raped their women and then cut you all's penises off and stuffed them in your mouths and then created a version called Black Jim Crowism. We didn't separate you guys from us because we thought you stink, because your noses were long and pointed. It's like, oh my God, that's horrible. Look at your little thin lips and that stringy hair. You guys are just so, and you're so fucking stupid. All the IQ tests show it. You're stupid, you're ugly, you stink. I'm surprised you guys survived this long, quite frankly. Right? And then we've got our big, huge philosophers who are talking about you. We come up with theories to explain why you guys are so degenerate. Right? We've got evolutionary accounts of why you guys didn't make it into the human pool. Right? Now, had that happened, we'd be in a very different situation. You would be talking to me about my blackness as a sign of privilege and power. And guess what my response would probably be? I ain't no racist. How can you call me a racist, Dr. Yancy? Do you really mean racist or like racist light? Right? Do you really mean? Because I know I'm not part of the Klan, and I'm assuming that nobody here at Roger Williams University is part of the Klan. I'm assuming that. No neo-Nazis. Right? But that's okay. I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis. We know those guys. Right? I'm saying that whiteness is part of a structure, and it's on a continuum. You don't get to opt out of that structure, which doesn't mean that you're not good. This is part of the problem. I'm not saying that you're not a good human being. I'm not saying you're not smart. Right? But I'm saying, at the end of the day, from my way of thinking about it, you're still a racist because you're part of a structure. Now, I can give you this very quickly, very interesting example that I give is when a white guy walks, if you read Peggy McIntosh, here's an example that I give, is when I walk into a store at the same time that the white guy does, and the white security follows me. Oftentimes my students want to say, Dr. Yancy, you can't say that the guy who walked in, the white guy who got the shop, is the racist. It's the guy who followed you the security guard that's the racist. Why do you say that? Because they build into the notion of racism intentionality, mean-spiritedness, and the actions on the part of the other individual trailing me immediately in the proximity between us, right? He's following me, whereas the other guy has gone over there. But see, my point is that it's not only the case of the guy who stereotypes me as the thief, because as we know, the majority of those people who shoplift are whites. Whites shoplift far more than black folk and people of color. But we get stereotyped for it. But here's the point. You might say that the guy who shops, the guy who gets the shop is the innocent one. But my point is that it's almost as if there is an invisible silent contract signed between the white security guard and the white guy who walks into the store at the same time that I do. And they've agreed that I am the criminal. And they've agreed that he isn't. Right? But notice, the person who gets the shop is considered ethical, can be trusted. But that trust is predicated precisely on my not being able to be trusted. You see? So that person is then complicit with my being followed. Because he gets the follow. He gets the shop. So the two bodies, as I'm arguing, are touching. That's the ontology of no edges. Right? That's the ethics of no edges. If that white body comes to understand the way in which he or she continues to perpetuate white supremacy and complicit with the system that touches me, then they have to take on a different level of responsibility, which would be far more radical than they've done. And what that looks like, again, I don't know. So what it looks like for white people to take on the full responsibility of the ways in which their whiteness, here at your university, outside of this university, impacts black people and people of color, and impacts you. I don't know what that looks like when it's in a state of crisis. I'm still looking for that. Another question? You're on.
I have a question. When you talked about people becoming more aware, becoming unsutured,
Yeah.
what role do you feel that? So my question is about implicit bias.
Yeah.
What role do you feel like people becoming aware of thoughts that they have that may not bubble up into their consciousness,
Oh, that's good.
but are there, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe they don't realize what they're doing is motivated by race.
Yeah, that's good. Let me give you a couple examples of this thing that happened. So Tim Wise, you guys know Tim Wise? He's a white guy who writes about white privilege. Have you never heard of Tim Wise? Okay, some of you have. So he's the white guy who talks about white privilege, he does important work. So one day he's walking, and he's walking toward the airplane. He gets on the airplane, and he walks by the cockpit, and he sees these African-American pilots, right, in the cockpit. And he says to himself, oh my God, can these guys fly this plane? Now this is someone white who's been working on his privilege, working on, presumably, his unconscious biases, right? But notice there it is. And what he says is, no matter what I knew to be the case, I couldn't help it. So that means epistemologically, to throw that nice term out, epistemology doesn't give him direct access to this kind of hidden assumption, what I'm calling this opacity, right? I'll give you another example, two more examples. There are studies that have shown that if you show white people hooked to MRI machines the photos of black faces and then a photo of white faces, that when the connection is to their amygdala, these images which registers danger, these images are being shown at a millisecond, which is like 1,000th of a second. So if I show you the images, you don't know what you just saw, right? What you've just seen. But what happens is that when the black image of the black face is seen, so to speak, the amygdala is doing all this activity neuronally, as opposed to seeing these white photos, right? There's something called neuronal mirroring. You guys may have heard of. Is when it's been experiments to see whether or not monkeys can experience empathy. So they have monkeys hooked up to MRI machines, watching other monkeys do things. So one monkey will watch another monkey climb a tree, let's say. And the neurons that are firing in the monkey that's climbing a tree, what they find is that the monkey that's observing, the same neuronal patterns are going on as if mirroring what is happening, right? Well, they hooked white people up to MRI machines, and they had them watch black people doing all kinds of things. According to the research, it was as if those white people were looking at a blank wall, which raises the question of white empathy. Right? And then one last example, and then I'll say something. Do you remember Kramer from Seinfeld? Do you remember that meltdown that he had? I almost have it down verbatim. It was something like, something like, I'm not going to get it. It was something like, I'm not going to get it. But he went on to say something like, oh, shut up. That's what he said. Shut up. So he's talking to these black guys, right? This is Kramer, Michael Richards, right? Seinfeld dude, right? He said, shut up. 50 years ago, these black people were talking while he was giving a talk. He said, 50 years ago, we'd have you upside down with a fucking fork up your ass. You can talk now, motherfucker. Throw him out. He's a nigger. You guys can see this on YouTube if you want. Look, a nigger. It's a nigger. A nigger. A nigger. Like 6 times he goes on to say it's a nigger, right? So then later, Seinfeld asks him to speak on Dave Letterman's show. He's not there in present, but he's kind of speaking on Dave Letterman while Seinfeld is there. So he gives him this opportunity to apologize. And according to Michael Richards, he apologized to Jesse Jackson, which I don't know what the hell that meant to me, quite frankly, as if somehow if you apologize to Jesse Jackson, you've apologized to all black people. That's just bullshit, right? But here is what this guy said, Kramer. He said, the insane thing about all of this is that I'm not a racist. And you're thinking, you said nigger 6 times, dude. 7.5 would do it, you know. But here's the power of that, right? But then he says something for which he lacked the wherewithal or the conceptual vocabulary to explain. He says, but you know, it fires out of me. It comes out of me. So at that moment, I would have stepped in and said, yes, precisely because racism is insidious. Because I love the etymology of words, if you look up insidious, it means to ambush. So my claim is that whites, one, need to have more ambushing experiences. Because in the ambush, what do they discover? And what happens in cases of unconscious bias? They are able to say something as powerful as this. I thought I knew me, but I really don't. Think about that. I mean, just saying that in any, like, I don't know, taking a course on Shakespeare, you kind of go, wow, I didn't know that much Shakespeare. I thought I did, but now I don't. But when you're talking about a core identity, like whether or not you're a racist, and you kind of go, I thought I wasn't, but I am? Like, what are the implications? I thought I knew me when I don't. And see, my claim is even stronger. It says, not only don't you know that, but you can't. Meaning you can't know the limits because of the opacity. Which means then that something like this has to happen. We need to create, creatively, a space where we get, that is to say, black people, white people, people of color, get to dwell near each other because we don't know each other, right? Because look, there's a whole history of this. Neighborhood covenants, redlining, white gated communities, you name it. Here at your university, right? The few blacks that are here, do you know them? Do you really know them? And by that, man, I don't mean saying, hey, what's up, man, but really thinking about what it means to be in the world, right? So I think that what we need then, in the light of these unconscious biases, is to put more people together in the most creative, respectful way that we can so they can dwell near. And when I say dwell near, that's just a rich concept, phenomenologically and otherwise. It means to be in the space of the other, to dwell near, not just to sit next to each other in class. I mean, that can happen, but we're 2 bodies next to each other. That's not dwelling. I take dwelling to be a more intimate, more disclosive, more rupturing, more unsuturing space, within which whites can actually begin to be ambushed. To say, oh my God, I didn't know that was there. I couldn't even articulate that. Right? But of course, this again is where black people come in and people of color. We are able to articulate what you can't even see. What if that's the case? And by the way, I'm not being arrogant epistemologically. I too am saying that women, you all, can say stuff about me that I don't know to be true. And we bullshit ourselves as men. We say, women will say, well, excuse me, can you look at my eyes? Well, I was looking at your eyes. What do you mean? Excuse me, you were not looking at my eyes. I was looking at your eyes, right? More than likely, they knew exactly what you were looking at, right? So I think that we have to create fecund spaces, dangerous spaces. Let's call them dangerous spaces, pedagogically dangerous spaces at a university like this, where people get to dwell near and become mutually vulnerable, to realize that there are aspects, in this case white students, there are aspects of their identities that they didn't know to be true. And once you find that out, that's going to be the powerful moment, the moment of revelation, that I thought I knew me and I didn't. Ain't that some shit? Now the work begins. And that work will last for the rest of your life. I will go to my grave fighting my sexism. Because it's not as if it just starts and then I've got it now. I'm like, ooh, I'm maintaining, I'm micromanaging it. Yeah. No, because when I go online, just looking for something else, there's Kim Kardashian's ass. Right in my face. I didn't ask for it, but there it is. Now I have to ask myself, and I'm being very concrete here, what do I do? Do I look? Or do I decide to turn it off? Or like, whatever you do, type in something else, right? Go to another site. I think I'll dwell with it for a little while. I think I'll stay in that space. But you see, as feminists have taught us, in film theory, they've taught us that men become interpolated as fuckers. Women are interpolated as fuckies. Whatever movie, you watch your old James Bond movies, believe it or not, there was a woman who was called Pussy Galore. You guys know Pussy Galore? I mean, that's a little misleading. Let me back up on that one. Do you guys know the character called Pussy Galore? Imagine that in a James Bond movie. And I remember as a little kid watching that, a little black boy. Her name is Pussy Galore? What? Think about what that's doing to my head, right? Yeah, my goodness, right? But see, we're constantly being bombarded in this way. So constantly, men are being constituted through our social interactions, through our symbolic interactions, through television, movie ads, posters. We're being constantly interpolated as fuckers. And you typically, as women, are the fuckies, which creates the subject-object dichotomy that is violent, despicable, deeply problematic. So my sexism it's constantly being reinforced as I'm chopping away at it. So I'll go to the grave, calling myself an anti-sexist sexist. Did I ask for it? Of course not. How can I have control over an entire history of white, well, let's not say white now, let's just keep it male patriarchy? How can I do that? I can't. But now I can begin to chop away at it, to deconstruct, to protest, to resist, to grow, to be uncomfortable, to unsuture, to lose sleep at night, right? To take your life, looking at women now, take your lives seriously, right? So that when I really see you and I go, I wonder if she's interested in calculus. I really mean that. Right? Because I assure you, many dudes ain't looking at you from afar thinking, does she read Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics? Ain't the case. Okay, how are we doing? One more question maybe and call it quits? Or shall we call it quits? Let me end on just to say that I think that, one, let me thank you again. Thank you all for coming out, because it's very important, and it's early to hear all this stuff. It's kind of early in the day, right? But we have to hear it, right? And the question becomes, what do we do afterward, right? Because it's so easy to leave this talk, as I said before, and just kind of go, wow, that was interesting, or whatever word you might use, but now I see the light. Well, sorry. I don't see the light. So I don't know how this 2 hours you've seen the light. You've seen something. But the question is, how do we keep whatever you're feeling right now, that affective level, how do you maintain it? And then how do you translate that into something that looks like action? Right? That begins to speak to the ways in which your whiteness perpetuates white supremacy. Because I assure you it's going to wear off. When you leave here, I'll give it 10, 20 minutes. Maybe you guys will talk about it a little bit. By tomorrow, you'll be fully okay. You'll be back again to walking across campus, feeling free, smiling. There's a whole lot of white people that walk across campus smiling, which I don't understand, but I've seen a lot of it at Emory. Places like at Duquesne, white students used to walk like this. And they'll be walking alone. I'll be thinking, what the hell? Like, what? But then I'm thinking, well, I guess if you're white, at a predominantly white university, white and in America, damn, you should be smiling, right? You should be happy, because it's all for you, which doesn't mean you ain't poor, right? And you don't struggle. That's not true. But you don't deal with racism. We deal with all your stuff plus some, right? So I would say try to sustain, to keep this unsuturing open. Try not to close it. Try not to suture over it. Let the blood flow. I don't mean that literally. Let the wound stay. Put salt on it if you must. Right? Lose sleep. And then ask yourself, how can I make that, how can I translate that into some kind of action that makes a difference? I'm not saying that tomorrow you will end hunger and poverty, right? I'm not saying it's impossible, because actually I firmly believe that us here, we can actually change America tomorrow if we so desired, because I believe we have something like radical choice. If we really wanted to, I could stick around. We could all go out on the field right here and sit down and refuse to move until your university becomes more diversified. But we ain't gonna do that. We got stuff to do. Got to eat, got other classes to go to. I need some ice cream at some point. But how do we sustain it? That's the question. Thanks again.